The wooden crate arrived at the Massachusetts State Archives in 1947, mislabeled as dietary records. Inside, 43 brass patient tags, each stamped with a bed number from Ward K. They had been stored in a groundskeeper's shed at Shattuck Hospital for 44 years, preserved not through intention but through abandonment. Every tag bore the same admission date, October 17, 1903. Every tag bore the same discharge notation, transferred. But Ward K's official capacity was 18 beds. The discrepancy sat unexamined until 1983, when a graduate researcher cross-referenced the tags against nursing logs. The logs documented 18 admissions to Ward K that October, 18 discharges, 18 transfers to the tuberculosis wing by month's end. The paperwork aligned perfectly. Routine, unremarkable, bureaucratically sound, except for the 43 brass tags that should not exist. The hospital's architectural plans, filed with the Boston Building Commission in 1902, specified Ward K as an isolation unit, single-story, north-facing, accessible only through a covered walkway separated from the main building. 18 beds, 1 nursing station, 2 exterior doors, both requiring key access. The ward was designed for containment, but the tags told a different story. 25 additional patients, cataloged in brass, never appearing in any logbook, any admission form, any physician's note. The records erased them with surgical precision. The metal remembered what the paper refused to confirm. And somewhere in that gap between 18 and 43 lies a question that tightens the further you pull. Who decided which patients would be written down? Before we continue, comment your city and the time you're watching this. It matters more to this investigation than you might expect. Ward K was built 6 months before it was needed. Construction records from April 1902 show hurried procurement, timber, copper piping, reinforced door hinges ordered in quantities suggesting permanence. The architect, Samuel Prescott, had designed asylums before, institutions meant to hold, not heal. The ward's location violated standard hospital planning. North-facing windows admitted minimal light. The covered walkway stretched 70 feet from the main building, isolating Ward K behind a maintenance yard and incinerator. Deliveries required crossing 3 locked gates. Staff quarters were positioned on the opposite end of campus. Prescott's handwritten margin notes, preserved in the building commission files, included one repeated phrase, "Secondary egress not advisable." He had designed the ward with a single, practical exit. The floor plan shows peculiarities that make sense only in retrospect. The nursing station faced inward, toward patient beds, rather than toward the entry, a reversal of institutional standard. Observation, not greeting. The 2 exterior doors opened outward, requiring force to pull closed from within. The windows, set high in the walls, were fixed, sealed permanently shut. But it was the ventilation system that revealed intention. Most hospital wards in 1903 relied on transom windows and natural airflow. Ward K received a dedicated coal-fed heating system with a single exterior vent positioned 15 feet above ground level. The air inside would remain separate from the air outside. 1 ward, 1 walkway, 1 breathing system that touched nothing else. The hospital opened Ward K on October 15, 1903. 2 days later, the first 18 patients arrived. Yet no record explains why the ward sat empty for 18 months before a single bed was filled. Nurse Margaret Hallowell received her Ward K assignment on October 16, 1903, 1 day before the first patients arrived. She had worked at Shattuck Hospital for 14 months, primarily in the surgical recovery ward. Her performance reviews described her as competent, punctual, and composed under pressure. Her personal diary, donated to the Massachusetts Historical Society by her granddaughter in 1971, contains entries spanning 6 years. October 16, 1903 appears on schedule. Neat cursive, consistent margins, routine observations about weather and meal preparations. October 17 is missing. The page was removed, cut cleanly along the binding. October 18 resumes without explanation, the handwriting noticeably compressed, as though she were rationing space or time. The hospital's nursing registry logged her shift assignments through December 1903. Ward K, October 17 to November 2. Every day 7 consecutive hours. Then an abrupt notation, reassigned at personal request. No subsequent nurse remained in Ward K longer than 4 days. Between November 1903 and March 1904, 12 different nurses cycled through the ward. The registry provides no reasons for the rotations, but the pattern is unmistakable. Arrival, brief tenure, removal. Some transfers were marked temporary reassignment. Others simply ended, the nurse's name appearing nowhere else in hospital records afterward. 3 nurses left Shattuck Hospital entirely within weeks of their Ward K assignments. 1, Lillian Crosby, moved to a textile factory in Lowell. Another, Anne Pritchard, took a position as a private governess, employment requiring no medical training whatsoever. Margaret Hallowell stayed at Shattuck Hospital until 1908, but never returned to Ward K. Her diary entry for November 3, 1903, the day after her reassignment, contains a single sentence: "I will not write what I have seen written." The ambiguity remains intentional. She would not record what the records already contained, or what the records had deliberately omitted. The admission paperwork for Ward K's first 18 patients survives in fragmentary form. Physician intake forms, present. Nursing logs, present. Personal effects inventories, missing. All 18 patients arrived on the same day from the same institution, Boston City Hospital's overflow ward. Their diagnoses varied: pneumonia, typhoid fever, complications from industrial accidents, but shared one characteristic: none required isolation for contagion. Ward K was designated for quarantine, yet these patients posed no documented infectious risk. The transfer authorizations, signed by Dr. Edwin Morehouse, Chief of Medicine, cited capacity limitations at Boston City Hospital. But census records from October 1903 show Boston City Hospital operating at 74% capacity. Bed availability was not the issue. The patients ranged in age from 19 to 61. 12 were men, 6 were women. Occupations listed: factory worker, seamstress, dockhand, laundress, porter, cook. No professionals. No individuals of recorded wealth or social standing. No one whose absence would require explanation to influential families. 3 patients, Daniel Bricker, Rose Callahan, and Samuel Unger, had been admitted to Boston City Hospital following workplace injuries. Their employer, the Suffolk Textile Company, had closed abruptly on October 10, 1903, leaving 78 workers unpaid and uninsured. The company's owner, Horace Langford, departed for Montreal on October 12. By October 17, Bricker, Callahan, and Unger were in Ward K. The hospital's billing ledger shows standard daily rates charged for each patient's care: $1.75 per day, paid by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts through the Pauper Fund, a public assistance account for indigent patients without family support. But Ward K's operational costs exceeded standard rates by significant margins. The dedicated heating system, the isolated infrastructure, the rotating nursing staff. Someone had authorized expenses that could not be reconciled with routine medical care for recovering workers, and not one patient ever wrote a letter, received a visitor, or appeared in any external correspondence during their time in Ward K. Margaret Hallowell's nursing log for October 17, 1903 opens with procedural efficiency: patient temperatures, pulse rates, medication times. The handwriting is controlled, the entries evenly spaced, routine observations, no complications. Then at 1:47 p.m., the consistency fractures. Bed 11, patient reports discomfort with light, curtain drawn, discomfort persists. Patient requests transfer to interior bed. 16 minutes later, Bed 11, patient moved to Bed 3 at patient request. No medical necessity observed. The log provides no further explanation. But Bed 11 was positioned beside a north-facing window, a window that admitted minimal light by design. And Bed 3 was the farthest position from any window in the ward, tucked against the interior wall near the nursing station. Margaret's handwriting tightens after this entry. The letters smaller, the pressure heavier. At 3:22 p.m., Bed 7, patient inquires about discharge timeline. Informed decision pending physician review. At 4:05 p.m., Bed 14, patient inquires about discharge timeline. Same information provided. At 5:18 p.m., multiple patients request confirmation of discharge date. Physician consultation requested. The patients were asking the same question in the same afternoon, not as individuals, but as a group realizing a shared condition. Dr. Edwin Morehouse's response, noted at 6:10 p.m., was filed separately from the nursing log but cross-referenced by date. His instruction was brief. Patients are to be informed, discharge is contingent upon full recovery, no fixed timeline to be provided. But the admission diagnoses varied. Different illnesses, different recovery trajectories. There was no clinical justification for a uniform discharge protocol. Margaret Hallowell's final entry for October 17 appears at 7:03 p.m., moments before her shift ended. All patients settled, no disturbances, ward secured. The word secured does not appear in any other nursing log entry from Shattuck Hospital in 1903. Patients were monitored, stabilized, discharged, never secured. And the next morning, when Margaret returned, one detail would dismantle the routine she had recorded. October 18, 1903. Margaret Hallowell's log opens with morning rounds. Temperatures recorded, medications administered, breakfast documented. But between the clinical notations, a disruption surfaces, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Bed 9, patient absent during morning rounds, located in washroom, returned to bed without incident. 15 minutes later, bed 9, patient absent again, located near exterior door, stated disorientation, returned to bed. 20 minutes after that, bed 9, patient secured to bed at physician order, agitation increasing. The patient in bed 9 was Thomas Henley, a 41-year-old dock worker admitted with pneumonia, a condition that does not typically produce disorientation or compulsive wandering. Margaret's log provides no medical justification for restraint, only the notation, physician order. But no physician's order exists in the corresponding medical file. Thomas Henley's restraint was documented in the nursing log but omitted from his official medical record, a record that would later describe his hospital stay as uneventful, and his discharge as routine transfer following full recovery. By midday on October 18th, 3 additional patients had been restrained. The reasons varied in wording: agitation, disorientation, non-compliance, but the outcome remained consistent. 4 patients, initially admitted for unrelated physical ailments, simultaneously exhibiting behavioral disruptions requiring mechanical restraint. Margaret's log contains no commentary, no speculation, no emotional register. The entries remain procedural, clinical, flawlessly documented. Yet the escalation is undeniable. At 2:34 p.m., a new entry appears. Bed 11. Patient requests paper and pen to write correspondence. Request denied per ward protocol. Ward protocol. Not physician order, not hospital policy. A protocol specific to Ward K. Standard hospital practice in 1903 encouraged patient correspondence as a therapeutic measure, maintaining family contact, reducing isolation, supporting morale. But Ward K operated under different rules. No letters would leave. No visitors would enter. And by the end of the week, the restraints would no longer be temporary measures. Dr. Edwin Morehouse conducted his first formal examination of Ward K patients on October 21, 1903, 4 days after their arrival. His medical notes, preserved in the hospital's physician log, described the visit as routine. Each patient examined, vital signs stable, recovery progressing as expected. But buried in the margin of his notes, written in smaller script, is a single phrase: behavioral observations consistent with preliminary expectations. Preliminary expectations, not diagnoses, not symptoms. Expectations suggesting the behaviors he observed were anticipated, not discovered. The physician log contains no record of what those expectations entailed, no prior documentation of a hypothesis, no baseline against which consistency could be measured. The phrase implies a framework that exists somewhere outside the official record. Dr. Morehouse had joined Shattuck Hospital in August 1903, 2 months before Ward K opened. His prior position? Clinical researcher at Boston City Hospital, specializing in nervous disorders and institutional psychiatry. His published work, appearing in the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal, explored the physiological basis of behavioral modification through environmental control, studies conducted on asylum patients who could not refuse participation. He had published 4 articles between 1899 and 1902. The 5th article, scheduled for publication in late 1903, never appeared. The journal's archives contain a withdrawn submission, the title visible on the manuscript cover sheet: Isolation and Suggestibility, Observations on Controlled Ward Environments. The manuscript itself is missing, only the cover sheet remains, stamped with a notation: Author request, do not publish. Dr. Morehouse's Ward K examinations continued weekly through November. His notes remained consistent: stable vitals, progressing recovery, behavioral observations aligning with expectations. But his discharge recommendations never materialized. Patients who had arrived with pneumonia, typhoid, and workplace injuries remained in Ward K long after their physical symptoms resolved. By November 15th, all 18 patients were ambulatory. None required ongoing medical intervention, yet none were discharged. And on November 18th, the nursing logs record a new development: the arrival of additional patients, ones who would never appear in any official admission record. The brass tags numbered 43. The official logs admitted 18. The gap of 25 patients exists only in metal, physical evidence that contradicts every written record. Margaret Hallowell's nursing log for November 18, 1903 contains no mention of new admissions. The patient census remains fixed at 18. Temperature charts, medication logs, meal distributions, all documented for the same 18 individuals who arrived on October 17th. But the log's material evidence tells a different story. The entry for November 18 appears on a new page. The previous page, November 17, ends mid-sentence, the final line trailing off as though interrupted. The ink color shifts slightly between entries, suggesting a different pen or a gap in time. The handwriting, while still Margaret's, carries a subtle tremor absent from earlier documentation. Hospital supply requisitions provide additional contradiction. On November 19th, Ward K's daily meal count increased from 18 to 31. The kitchen ledger documents the order: 31 breakfasts, 31 lunches, 31 dinners. The requisition was signed by Margaret Hallowell, but her nursing log continues to document only 18 patients, 13 additional meals, every day. For patients who do not exist in writing, the hospital's laundry records show a corresponding increase. Bed linens, hospital gowns, towels, all submitted in quantities exceeding 18 patients' needs. The laundry manifests are precise: 43 sets of linens requested from Ward K between November 18th and December 1st, 1903. 43. The exact number of brass tags, yet no admission paperwork survives for the additional patients. No intake examinations, no diagnoses, no names attached to the meals consumed, the linens soiled, the beds occupied. The only physical evidence of their presence: supply requisitions documenting their biological needs: food, water, cloth. The bureaucracy of the body, continuing silently in ledgers that no one questioned because no one reviewed laundry counts for contradictions. But someone had to unlock the ward's exterior door to admit them. Someone had to assign bed numbers, issue brass tags, integrate their care into daily routines. Someone had to decide that these patients would exist only in the material record, never in the written one. And someone had to know that 25 people could vanish into an isolation ward without a single documented entry because no one outside Ward K was counting. On November 2nd, 1903, Margaret Hallowell submitted her request for reassignment. The hospital's personnel director, Mr. Amos Whitfield, approved the transfer within hours, an administrative speed that contradicted standard protocols, requiring 2 weeks' notice and supervisor review. Margaret's replacement, Nurse Catherine Delacroix, began her Ward K assignment on November 3rd. Her employment record shows 15 months of experience at Massachusetts General Hospital, specializing in surgical recovery. Competent, professional, no disciplinary notations. Catherine lasted 3 days. Her nursing logs for November 3-5 are meticulous: temperatures, medications, meals, vital signs. But the entries grow increasingly compressed, the handwriting tighter with each passing hour. By November 5th, her notes occupy half the usual space, as though she were rationing paper or time. Her final entry, November 5th at 6:47 p.m., ward secured, all patients settled, request immediate reassignment. She left Shattuck Hospital entirely on November 9th. No forwarding institution listed, no explanation provided. The employment record simply ends. Nurse number 3, Sarah Pemberton, November 6-9, 4 days. Departed Shattuck Hospital on November 12th. Nurse number 4, Alice Brennan, November 10-12, 2 days. Transferred to administrative duties, never returned to patient care. Nurse number 5, Ruth Garrison, November 13-16, 4 days. Reassigned to obstetrics ward. Her personnel file contains a physician's note dated November 17th. Recommend modified duties. employee experiencing stress-related symptoms. The pattern accelerated. By December, Ward K cycled through nurses every 48 to 72 hours. Some transfers were marked personal request. Others appeared without explanation. The nurse's name simply removed from the rotation schedule, replaced by another. 3 nurses resigned from Shattuck Hospital between November and January. 2 requested transfers to non-medical positions within the institution. 1, Emily Radcliffe, was found unconscious in the nursing dormitory on December 8, 1903. The hospital's incident report cited exhaustion and nervous collapse. She was discharged from employment while still recovering. No nurse who worked in Ward K ever wrote a formal complaint. No incident reports referenced specific events. No testimony explained what drove competent medical professionals to abandon their posts, their careers, their capacity to remain in proximity to Ward K. The silence was structural, comprehensive, and institutional. But silence leaves its own evidence, and the hospital's financial records would reveal what the nursing logs refused to name. Hospital accounting ledgers are not designed for mystery. They document the mundane machinery of institutional survival: coal, bandages, wages, soap. But Ward K's expenditures violated the logic of routine. Between October and December 1903, Shattuck Hospital's general operating costs remained stable. Slight increases in coal consumption during colder months. Predictable staffing expenses. Standard medical supply orders. Ward K's dedicated accounts showed different patterns. Coal deliveries to Ward K's isolated heating system occurred weekly, twice the frequency of any other hospital building. The quantities ordered exceeded calculations for an 18-bed ward by 40%. The coal was delivered after dark, signed for by night maintenance staff rather than daytime supervisors. Medical supply orders included items inconsistent with the patient's documented diagnoses. Leather restraints, ordered in November, quantities sufficient for 12 full-body sets. Sedative medications, morphine and chloral hydrate requisitioned in volumes exceeding standard pain management protocols. Observation notebooks, 24 blank ledgers ordered in December, none appearing in the nursing station's documented inventory. But the most revealing expenditure appeared in a miscellaneous category labeled consulting services. Between November 1903 and February 1904, Shattuck Hospital paid Dr. Edwin Morehouse an additional stipend beyond his standard physician salary, $40 per month, classified as specialized ward supervision. The payments were authorized by the hospital's board of directors but required no detailed justification, no description of services rendered, no accounting of hours worked. $40 per month was equivalent to a nurse's full salary. For supervision that generated no written reports, no published findings, no documented medical innovations. The payment records end abruptly in February 1904, the same month Ward K closed. Cross-referencing financial records with nursing rotations reveals another pattern. Each departing nurse received a severance payment upon leaving Shattuck Hospital. The amounts varied between $15 and $50. Significant sums in 1903, equivalent to 2 weeks to 1 month's wages. The payments were classified as employment conclusion compensation, a category that did not exist in any other hospital employment record. They were being paid to leave, and paid well enough to leave quietly. The hospital's treasurer, Mr. Leonard Ashford, signed every Ward K expenditure without question. His personal correspondence, preserved in the Massachusetts Business Archives, contains one relevant letter dated March 1904, written to a colleague at Boston City Hospital. The matter you referenced is concluded, all accounts reconciled, no further inquiries anticipated. The matter is never named. The conclusion is never explained. But the accounting closes with surgical precision. Ward K had cost Shattuck Hospital 3 times its projected operational budget, and not $1 was questioned until decades after the ward was empty. Patient correspondence was a standard element of hospital care in 1903. Families wrote, patients replied. Letters moved through wards daily, carried by orderlies, posted by administrative staff. Communication was considered therapeutic, evidence of recovery, connection to life outside institutional walls. Ward K's patients wrote no letters, not because they lacked access to paper. Supply requisitions show regular orders for stationery delivered to the ward, not because they lacked literacy, Census records indicate 12 of the original 18 patients had documented reading and writing skills. They wrote no letters because every attempt was intercepted. The discovery emerged decades later, not from hospital archives, but from a private estate sale in 1968. Among the belongings of Dr. Edwin Morehouse's granddaughter, a locked wooden box containing 47 unsealed letters written on Shattuck Hospital stationery, addressed to family members, friends, employers. None had ever been mailed. The letters dated between October 1903 and January 1904. The authors, patients from Ward K. Their words, desperate, confused, increasingly frantic. Thomas Henley, bed 9, writing to his wife on October 24, 1903. They say I am recovering but will not say when I can leave. I feel well enough to work. Why am I still here? Rose Callahan, bed 6, writing to her sister on November 3. The nurses change every few days. None will answer my questions. Something is wrong with this place. The new patients who arrived last week are not in the records. I saw them brought in after dark. Samuel Unger, bed 14, writing to his brother on November 19. I have tried to leave twice. The doors are locked from outside. They tell me it is for safety, but I am not sick anymore. No one is sick. We are being kept. The letters were never sent, but they were preserved, kept in Dr. Morehouse's personal possession for 41 years, then passed unknowingly to his descendants. Whether he intended them as evidence, insurance, or simply forgot their existence remains unclear. But the content reveals what the official logs concealed. The patients knew. They understood they were not receiving standard medical care. They recognized the contradictions between their physical health and their continued confinement. And they tried to tell someone. The most disturbing letter was dated December 8, 1903, written by an unidentified patient. No signature, no bed number, the handwriting erratic. They are testing something. The doctors watch but do not explain. The new ones are sicker. We are breathing the same air. Whatever they brought, we will all have soon. The letter ends mid-sentence. The paper is torn along the bottom edge as though ripped from a notebook in haste. It was the only letter that suggested Ward K was not just holding patients. It was exposing them. Dr. Morehouse kept 2 sets of notes. The official physician logs filed with hospital records documented routine observations, stable vitals, progressing recovery, no complications, standard medical language for standard medical care. The second set of notes was discovered in 1956, tucked inside a medical textbook donated to Boston University's archives after Dr. Morehouse's death. 43 pages of handwritten observations, dated between October and February 1903 to 1904. These notes used different language. October 24, 1903. Subjects demonstrate expected anxiety response to environmental isolation. Control group, beds 1 to 6, shows baseline behavioral patterns. Introduction of secondary exposure planned for November. Subjects, not patients. Control group, not individuals recovering from illness. Secondary exposure, not treatment. November 7, 1903. New subjects introduced after dark to minimize external observation. Integration into ward environment complete within 48 hours. Primary subjects aware of their presence but demonstrate confusion regarding official count. Discrepancy intentional. Enhances disorientation effect. The 25 unwritten patients were not accidental omissions. They were deliberately hidden from documentation while being visibly present to the original 18, creating cognitive dissonance, forcing the primary subjects to question their own perception. November 20, 1903. Behavioral symptoms emerging in 14 of 18 primary subjects. Sleep disruption, appetite changes, increased questioning of staff, attempted departures, consistent with hypothesized response to sustained uncertainty and environmental control. They were not treating symptoms, they were creating them. December 3, 1903. Secondary subjects now exhibiting marked physiological symptoms, fever, respiratory distress, dermal lesions. Primary subjects show early cross-contamination indicators. Isolation protocols maintained. No external reporting. The 25 additional patients had not arrived healthy. They had been admitted with something, an illness that was being deliberately contained within Ward K, while the original 18 patients were exposed. Dr. Morehouse's final entry, dated February 14, 1904. Study concluded. Results exceed initial projections. All subjects transferred per protocol. Comprehensive findings withheld from publication due to methodological concerns. Documentation archived privately. Methodological concerns. Not ethical violations, not horror at what had been done. Methodological concerns, the language of a researcher disappointed by experimental design flaws, not by human cost. The study had a hypothesis. The patients were test cases. Ward K was not a hospital ward, it was a laboratory, and no one outside its walls had known what was being measured. On February 16, 1904, Ward K emptied. The hospital's official transfer record lists 18 patients moved to the tuberculosis wing at Shattuck Hospital's satellite facility in Rutland, Massachusetts. 18 names, 18 bed assignments, 18 futures documented in bureaucratic precision, but the brass tags numbered 43. The transfer paperwork provides no explanation for the discrepancy. The 25 unlisted patients simply vanish from all records after February 15. No discharge notes, no forwarding locations, no death certificates filed with the state. They disappear as silently as they arrived. The 18 documented transfers present their own contradiction. Rutland was a tuberculosis sanitarium, a specialized facility for long-term respiratory care. But the original Ward K patients were admitted for pneumonia, typhoid, and industrial injuries. None had documented tuberculosis diagnoses, yet all 18 were transferred to a tuberculosis facility. The Rutland admission records, preserved in the Massachusetts Department of Public Health archives, confirm their arrival. 18 patients from Shattuck Hospital, February 17, 1904. But the diagnoses listed in Rutland's intake files differ from their original Ward K records. Thomas Henley, originally admitted for pneumonia, Rutland intake, advanced tuberculosis. Rose Callahan, originally admitted for complications from workplace injury. Rutland intake, pulmonary tuberculosis with dermal manifestations. Samuel Unger, originally admitted for typhoid fever. Rutland intake, tuberculosis with respiratory and neurological involvement. All 18 patients, regardless of their original conditions, arrived at Rutland with the same diagnosis, tuberculosis, a disease none of them had documented when they entered Ward K 4 months earlier. Tuberculosis was not contracted overnight. It developed slowly, often taking months or years to progress to advanced stages. But these patients deteriorated uniformly, simultaneously, while isolated together in a ward designed for environmental control. Dr. Morehouse's hidden notes suggested cross-contamination from the 25 unwritten patients, individuals who arrived with marked physiological symptoms. The original 18 had been exposed, deliberately, to something the secondary group carried. Rutland's medical records track the 18 patients through 1904. By October, 7 had died. By January 1905, an additional 4. By June 1905, only 3 remained alive. The final 3, Margaret Doherty, James Sullivan, and Anna Kozlowski, survived until 1906, 1907, and 1908, respectively. All 3 died of tuberculosis-related complications. All 3 spent their final years in isolation, far from families who had lost contact during their Ward K confinement. None of their death certificates mention Ward K. None reference the months they spent in an experimental isolation ward before tuberculosis appeared in their lungs. The transfers had not saved them. The transfers had simply moved the evidence. The nurses never testified, not in writing, not in interviews, not in any formal inquiry. Their silence was not accidental, it was contractual. The severance payments each departing nurse received included a standard document discovered in 1989 among the personal papers of Mr. Amos Whitfield, Shattuck Hospital's personnel director. The document, titled Employment Conclusion Agreement, contained 3 paragraphs of legal language surrounding one core provision. The departing employee agrees to maintain strict confidentiality regarding all patient care observations, ward procedures, and internal hospital matters encountered during employment. Violation of this agreement may result in legal action and financial penalties. They had been paid to leave, and paid to stay quiet. But silence creates its own archive. Margaret Hallowell's diary, with its missing page for October 17, 1903. Catherine Delacroix's abrupt disappearance from all employment records. Emily Radcliffe's nervous collapse. These absences formed a collective testimony. Evidence written in what was not said. One nurse broke the silence, decades too late to matter. In 1949, a letter arrived at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, postmarked from Providence, Rhode Island. The sender, Ruth Garrison, one of the rotating nurses who worked Ward K in November 1903. She was 71 years old, dying of heart disease, writing what she had never spoken. The letter, preserved in the department's investigative files, is 3 pages long. It describes her 4 days in Ward K, the patients who appeared in the nursing logs and the patients who did not. The locked doors, the contradictory meal counts, the brass tags that outnumbered the documented beds. She wrote, "I knew something was wrong, but I was 24 years old and afraid of losing my position. The other nurses never spoke of it, even among ourselves. We were rotated so quickly that no one nurse saw enough to piece together the whole picture. Or perhaps we all saw enough, but lacked the courage to name it." Ruth's letter included one additional detail absent from all other records: the smell. Ward K had a particular odor, not the typical hospital smells of carbolic and illness. Something sharper, almost chemical, mixed with decay. It intensified near the beds farthest from the nursing station, where the patients not listed in our logs were kept. I asked Dr. Morehouse about it once. He told me it was normal for isolation wards. But I had worked in isolation before. That smell was not normal. The Massachusetts Department of Public Health reviewed Ruth's letter, cross-referenced it with available hospital records, and concluded insufficient evidence to warrant formal investigation. Allegations unsubstantiated by official documentation. Ruth Garrison died 6 weeks after sending the letter. No follow-up interview was conducted. Her testimony vanished into the same silence that had swallowed the nurses, the patients, and the 25 individuals who were never written down. But the smell she described would surface again, in testimony from someone who had no reason to lie, because they had never worked in Ward K at all. Isaiah Fletcher was 63 years old in 1903, employed as head groundskeeper at Shattuck Hospital for 19 years. He maintained the lawns, repaired fences, cleared snow, and kept the exterior maintenance shed, where in 1947 someone would find 43 brass patient tags stored in a wooden crate. Isaiah never entered Ward K. His duties ended at the exterior walls. But he observed what others did not: the movements after dark, the deliveries made through side gates, the patterns that emerged when no one thought a groundskeeper was watching. His personal journal, donated to the Massachusetts Historical Society in 1963 by his grandson, contains entries spanning 40 years. The handwriting is rough, the spelling inconsistent, but the observations are precise. November 18, 1903, new patients brought to Ward K after 9 p.m. 2 wagons, curtains drawn, did not come through main entrance. Used service road behind incinerator, saw Dr. Morehouse unlock ward, counted 13 figures exit wagons, too dark to see faces. November 22, 1903, heard crying from Ward K around midnight while closing shed. Went closer to investigate, stopped before reaching walkway. Thought better of it, not my concern. December 5, 1903, Dr. Morehouse asked me to burn documents from Ward K. Gave me satchel full of papers. Did not look inside, not my place. Burned everything in incinerator behind maintenance shed. Fire took 2 hours. Isaiah followed orders. He burned what he was told to burn. He asked no questions, but he remembered what he saw. December 14, 1903, smell from Ward K growing stronger. Wind carries it toward main building now. Like something rotting but also sharp, stings the throat. Mentioned it to Mr. Whitfield. He told me to mind my work. Isaiah's journal entries about Ward K stop abruptly on February 15, 1904, the day before the patients were transferred. His next entry, February 17, skips the events of the transfer entirely. Ward K empty today. Windows being sealed, walkway gate locked permanently. Was told to store any remaining items in shed. Found brass tags in medical waste bin, set aside in crate for hospital records. No one ever collected them. He had saved the tags without understanding their significance. 43 pieces of brass that contradicted 18 names. Evidence preserved by accident, by a man whose job was to maintain grounds, not question authority. Isaiah Fletcher worked at Shattuck Hospital until 1921. He never mentioned Ward K again in his journal. But his final entry about the ward, dated February 17, 1904, includes one additional line. Some things should stay buried. This is one of them. He had seen enough to know silence was safer than truth. But the tags remained in his shed for 43 years, waiting for someone who did not know they should stay buried. The Massachusetts State Medical Library holds an incomplete collection of the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal from 1903. Most issues are intact. One issue, November 12, 1903, is missing from every archived copy in the state. The issue existed. Library card catalogs reference it. Subscription records confirm its publication, but the physical copies have vanished from Boston University, Harvard Medical School, Massachusetts General Hospital, and the Boston Athenaeum. Removed, not lost. In 1978, a retired medical librarian named Dorothy Hayes discovered a single surviving copy in a private estate sale. The journal had belonged to Dr. Charles Waverly, a Boston City Hospital physician who died in 1954. He had kept personal copies of journals dating back decades, stored in his attic, forgotten by inheritors who valued the space more than the contents. Dorothy purchased the collection for $30. Inside the November 12, 1903 issue, a brief article, 2 pages long, titled Clinical Notes on an Unusual Respiratory Presentation. The article had no attributed author. It was published anonymously, a rarity for medical journals, reserved for politically sensitive or ethically ambiguous content. The text described 4 patients admitted to an unnamed Boston area hospital in October 1903. All 4 presented with respiratory symptoms initially diagnosed as pneumonia. All 4 failed to respond to standard treatments. All 4 developed secondary symptoms within 2 weeks. Dermal lesions, neurological disruption, progressive pulmonary collapse. The article noted, diagnostic confusion arose from the presentation's resemblance to tubercular infection, though the rapidity of symptom progression and distinctive lesion patterns suggest an alternative etiology. The possibility of an environmental or infectious agent warrants further investigation, though patient isolation has prevented broader institutional exposure. Environmental or infectious agent. Patient isolation preventing broader exposure. The article's final paragraph contained the most revealing detail. Clinical observation suggests this presentation may result from exposure to industrial contaminants, specifically textile dyes containing arsenical compounds. 3 of the 4 patients were employed in textile manufacturing prior to hospitalization. Daniel Bricker, Rose Callahan, and Samuel Unger, 3 of the original 18 Ward K patients, had worked at Suffolk Textile Company before the factory closed abruptly on October 10, 1903. Suffolk Textile had specialized in synthetic dye production, a process that frequently involved arsenical compounds, toxic, cumulative, capable of causing respiratory and neurological damage. Workers in such factories often developed symptoms slowly, over months or years of exposure. But if a group of workers were suddenly exposed to concentrated dye chemicals through an industrial accident, a contaminated workspace, a catastrophic ventilation failure, the symptoms could manifest rapidly, aggressively, lethally. The Suffolk Textile Company closed without explanation. 78 workers were dismissed immediately. 3 ended up in Ward K, and within weeks, the textile workers were showing symptoms that spread to the other patients sharing their air, their ward, their isolation. Dr. Morehouse had not been studying behavioral responses to environmental control. He had been studying disease transmission from industrial poisoning, using the 18 healthy patients as controls, exposing them to the textile workers' contamination, documenting how quickly and thoroughly toxic exposure could spread in an enclosed environment. Ward K was not a treatment facility. It was a contagion chamber. And the 25 additional patients, the ones never written down, had likely been Suffolk textile workers too, brought in after dark, their poisoning already advanced, their bodies used to test whether the contamination was transmissible or purely environmental. The answer was written in the 18 transfers to Rutland. All of them developed tuberculosis-like symptoms because arsenical poisoning mimics tuberculosis, respiratory failure, wasting, lesions that never heal. But no one would call it poisoning, because poisoning required blame, liability, compensation. Tuberculosis was an act of nature. Tuberculosis required no one to answer for what had been done. Suffolk Textile Company occupied a 4-story brick building on the edge of Boston's industrial waterfront. It employed 82 workers at its peak: dyers, sorters, pressers, loaders. The work was steady, the pay modest, the conditions typical for 1903, which is to say, dangerous. The factory specialized in synthetic dyes, particularly aniline-based colors that had revolutionized textile production in the late 19th century. Cheaper than natural dyes, more vibrant, more profitable, they were also toxic. Exposure caused respiratory irritation, skin lesions, and neurological damage. Workers knew the risks. They had no choice but to accept them. On October 10, 1903, Suffolk Textile closed without warning. The owner, Horace Langford, posted a notice on the factory door that morning. Operations suspended indefinitely. All employees released from service effective immediately. No severance. No explanation. No forwarding address. Boston city directories show Horace Langford's residence address in 1902, but listed as vacant in 1904. Passport records, obtained through a 1982 Freedom of Information Act request, show Langford traveled to Montreal on October 12, 1903. He never returned to the United States. The factory building sat empty for 3 months before being purchased by a real estate speculator in January 1904. The new owner hired contractors to clear the building's contents: machinery, chemical stores, employee records. Everything was removed and destroyed. Almost everything. In 1991, during renovation of the building, by then converted to residential lofts, workers discovered a sealed room in the basement. The door had been bricked over, hidden behind a false wall. Inside, barrels of chemical waste, crystallized and hardened after 90 years. Lab analysis identified the contents: high concentrations of arsenic trioxide, lead acetate, and mercury compounds, all used in synthetic dye production, all lethal in sufficient doses. The room also contained remnants of paperwork, charred fragments of employment records, inventory sheets, incident reports. Most were too damaged to read. One fragment, partially preserved, was dated October 8, 1903, 2 days before the factory closed. The legible text read: "Extensive contamination of ventilation system. Recommend immediate evacuation," and the rest was ash. Something had happened at Suffolk Textile in early October 1903. Something severe enough to trigger an emergency closure. Something that exposed workers to concentrated chemical contamination. And rather than report the incident, accept liability, face legal consequences, Horace Langford shut down the factory, fled the country, and left his workers to suffer the effects in silence. 3 of those workers, Daniel Bricker, Rose Callahan, Samuel Unger, were admitted to Boston City Hospital within days of the factory's closure. Their symptoms: respiratory distress, confusion, lesions, not illness, poisoning. And then they were transferred to Ward K, where their contamination could be studied under controlled conditions, isolated from public view, documented in notes that would never be published. The other 78 workers scattered. Some found new employment, some left the city. Some likely developed symptoms, but never sought treatment, unable to afford hospitalization, or too afraid to report an industrial injury with an employer to hold accountable. And 25 of them, 25 whose names were never recorded, ended up in Ward K after dark, their poisoning too advanced to hide, their bodies used to measure how quickly the contamination could spread. Suffolk Textile's closure was not a business failure. It was a cover-up, and Ward K was where the evidence was contained. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts paid for Ward K. Public hospital care for indigent patients was funded through state appropriations, drawn from the Pauper Fund, a budget line designed to ensure basic medical treatment for those who could not afford private care. Shattuck Hospital received these funds monthly, submitting detailed expense reports to the state auditor's office. Ward K's operational costs were billed to the Pauper Fund between October 1903 and February 1904. But the expenses far exceeded standard patient care rates, and no one at the state auditor's office questioned the discrepancy. Why would the Commonwealth pay inflated costs for an isolation ward treating textile workers poisoned by industrial contamination? The answer lies in what the Commonwealth stood to lose. In 1903, Massachusetts led the nation in textile manufacturing. Factories in Boston, Lowell, Lawrence, and Fall River employed over 100,000 workers, generating millions in annual revenue. The industry was the backbone of the state's economy and its political power. Industrial poisoning cases, when made public, triggered expensive consequences: lawsuits, regulatory scrutiny, labor unrest, reputational damage. Factory owners lobbied aggressively to suppress reports of workplace contamination. State officials, many with financial ties to textile companies, cooperated willingly. But Suffolk Textile's October 1903 contamination incident was too severe to ignore entirely. Workers were collapsing. Symptoms were undeniable. If the poisoning became public, it would raise uncomfortable questions. How many other factories operated under similar conditions? How many workers had been poisoned? How much was the industry hiding? The solution: isolate the affected workers. Document their conditions under the guise of medical study. Classify their symptoms as disease rather than poisoning. Transfer them to a remote facility where they could die quietly, their deaths attributed to tuberculosis, a common, tragic, blameless illness. Dr. Morehouse's study served dual purposes: scientific curiosity and political convenience. He could research disease transmission, while the Commonwealth ensured that industrial poisoning remained invisible. The proof lies in the funding. Ward K received state payments without standard oversight because someone at the Commonwealth level had authorized the expenditures and ensured they would not be questioned. Someone who understood that a few $1,000s spent on silence was cheaper than the lawsuits, regulations, and economic disruption that public exposure would trigger. No official record names that person, but the state auditor in 1903 was Franklin Osgood, whose brother-in-law, William Greaves, sat on the board of directors for 3 major textile companies. And the governor of Massachusetts, John L. Bates, had received substantial campaign contributions from textile industry associations. The connections were not hidden. They were simply accepted as normal, the machinery of power functioning as designed. Ward K was not an anomaly, it was policy. The Commonwealth paid for the ward, Dr. Morehouse conducted his research, and the textile industry continued operating without accountability. And when Ward K closed in February 1904, the records were buried, the nurses were silenced, and the patients were transferred to die out of sight. The Commonwealth had purchased its silence efficiently. Rutland State Sanitarium, located 60 miles west of Boston, specialized in long-term tuberculosis care. The facility, opened in 1898, housed over 300 patients by 1904. Its medical records, preserved at the Massachusetts State Archives, document thousands of admissions, treatments, and deaths across decades of operation. The 18 patients transferred from Ward K on February 17, 1904, occupy a peculiar space in those records. They arrived together, were housed in a dedicated wing, and died at rates far exceeding typical tuberculosis mortality. Between February 1904 and June 1905, 15 of the 18 were dead, an 83% mortality rate. For comparison, Rutland's overall tuberculosis mortality rate during the same period was 31%. The patients from Ward K died faster, suffered more, and responded to no treatments. Dr. Harold Finch, Rutland's chief physician, documented his confusion in monthly reports to the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. His March 1904 report noted, "The recent transfers from Shattuck Hospital present an atypical disease progression. Standard tubercular treatments, fresh air, rest, nutritional support yield no improvement. Several patients exhibit symptoms inconsistent with pulmonary tuberculosis, including neurological decline and unusual dermal manifestations." By May 1904, Dr. Finch requested clarification on the patient's medical histories. His letter to Dr. Morehouse, preserved in Rutland's correspondence files, asked specific questions. What were the patient's original diagnoses? Had they been exposed to environmental contaminants? Was there any history of industrial chemical exposure? Dr. Morehouse's response, dated May 18, 1904, was brief. Patients were admitted to Shattuck Hospital with various respiratory ailments and subsequently developed tubercular symptoms during their stay. No environmental exposure history is noted in their records. Standard TB protocols are recommended. The response was a lie. The patients had been exposed to arsenical poisoning at Suffolk Textile. Their tubercular symptoms were the result of sustained chemical contamination, not infectious disease. Dr. Morehouse knew this. He had documented it in his private notes. But he withheld that information from Dr. Finch, ensuring the Rutland physicians would treat the patients for tuberculosis, a disease they did not have, while their bodies continued deteriorating from poisoning that no one acknowledged. The first death occurred on April 3, 1904. Thomas Henley, the dock worker who had tried repeatedly to leave Ward K. He was 41 years old. His Rutland death certificate listed cause of death as pulmonary tuberculosis with complications. The deaths continued through 1905. Rose Callahan, Samuel Unger, Daniel Bricker. Names that had been written on brass tags in Ward K, transferred to Rutland's intake forms, and finally recorded on death certificates, each one attributing their deaths to tuberculosis, never mentioning the factory, the contamination, or the isolation ward where they had been studied like specimens. 3 patients survived long enough to see 1906. They were transferred to Rutland's chronic care wing, a section for patients with no hope of recovery, awaiting death. Margaret Doherty died in March 1906, James Sullivan in August 1907, Anna Kozlowski in January 1908. All 3 died alone. None had received visitors during their years at Rutland. None had family contacts listed in their files. They had been severed from the world outside Ward K, and that severance remained complete until their deaths. The final patient from Ward K, Anna Kozlowski, was buried in Rutland's pauper cemetery, an unmarked grave among hundreds of others. No headstone. No memorial, just a plot number in the sanitarium's burial log, Section C, Row 7, Grave 14. She had entered Ward K in October 1903 as a patient, she left in February 1904 as evidence, and she died in 1908 as a statistic. The 18 patients who were documented had names, death certificates, burial plots. The 25 who were never written down left no such traces. They simply vanished. For 70 years, Ward K was forgotten. The building that housed it was demolished in 1952. The walkway that connected it to Shattuck Hospital was paved over. The brass tags sat in a groundskeeper's shed until 1947, when they were transferred to the Massachusetts State Archives as miscellaneous medical artifacts, curiosities without context. No one questioned the discrepancy between 43 tags and 18 documented patients. No one cross-referenced the tags against nursing logs, supply requisitions, or financial records. The contradiction sat in plain sight, ignored because no one was looking. The first researcher to notice the inconsistency was a graduate student named Eleanor Voss, conducting archival work for a dissertation on early 20th century hospital administration. In 1983, she requested Ward K's admission records and discovered the gap. Eleanor's initial assumption was clerical error. Brass tags ordered in bulk, extras stored for future use. But the tags were all stamped with October 17, 1903, the same admission date, and the wear patterns on the metal indicated prolonged use, not storage. She expanded her search: nursing logs, financial ledgers, personnel records, patient transfers. Each document added another piece of the contradiction. Her dissertation, completed in 1985, dedicated an entire chapter to Ward K. The title, Institutional Gaps: The Problem of Undocumented Patient Care in Early State Hospitals. She concluded that Ward K likely housed patients whose care was funded through irregular channels, perhaps private payments, perhaps charitable donations, leading to incomplete official documentation. It was a reasonable conclusion, but it was wrong. The actual explanation emerged in 1989 when a research librarian named Marcus Chen discovered Dr. Morehouse's hidden notes inside the donated medical textbook at Boston University. The notes were not archived as Ward K material. They were simply part of a personal library donation, uncatalogued, unexamined. Marcus read the notes and recognized their significance immediately. He contacted Eleanor Voss, who had moved on to teaching hospital history at Massachusetts General Hospital. Together, they assembled the full picture: the textile factory contamination, the state's financial involvement, the experimental isolation, the deliberate exposure, the falsified diagnoses. They published their findings in 1991 in the Journal of the History of Medicine and Allied Sciences. The article, titled "Ward K, industrial poisoning, state complicity, and the erasure of patient identity in early 20th century Massachusetts, documented the entire operation with meticulous detail. The response was muted. A few letters to the journal editor. One newspaper article in the Boston Globe, buried on page 12. No official investigation. No re-examination of hospital practices. No accountability sought from the institutions involved. Because everyone responsible was dead. Suffolk Textile was long closed. Dr. Morehouse had died in 1954. The Commonwealth officials who authorized the expenditures were decades in their graves. And the patients, both the 18 documented and the 25 erased, had been dead for nearly a century. History had moved past Ward K. The revelation changed nothing except the record itself, but the record matters. Because the erasure was not accidental. The silence was not passive. Every missing name, every withheld document, every falsified diagnosis was a choice made by people who understood exactly what they were doing. Ward K was not a tragedy. It was a method. And the method did not die with the ward. Ward K closed in February 1904. But the logic that created it, isolate, study, suppress, erase, did not close with it. Industrial poisoning cases continued throughout the early 20th century. Textile factories, chemical plants, mining operations, all exposing workers to lethal substances while denying responsibility. When workers became ill, they were diagnosed with tuberculosis, pneumonia, nervous disorders, anything but poisoning, which required legal accountability. The pattern was systemic. Contamination occurred, workers suffered, institutions contained the evidence, and the public never learned the truth until decades later, when it no longer mattered. In 1910, a group of radium dial painters at the United States Radium Corporation began developing mysterious illnesses: jaw necrosis, anemia, bone fractures. The company physicians diagnosed them with syphilis, suggesting moral rather than occupational causes. It took 15 years for the truth to emerge: radium poisoning, covered up by the corporation and complicit medical professionals. In 1930, workers at a DuPont chemical plant in West Virginia were exposed to toxic fumes from tetraethyl lead production. Many developed neurological symptoms. The company classified their conditions as hysteria and malingering. Only after multiple deaths did investigations reveal the poisoning. In 1948, the Donora smog incident in Pennsylvania killed 20 people and sickened over 6,000 from industrial air pollution. Initial reports blamed weather conditions. It took years to confirm that zinc smelting operations had poisoned the town's air. The parallels to Ward K are unmistakable. Industrial contamination, institutional denial, falsified medical diagnoses, delayed accountability. The mechanisms refined over decades, adapted to new industries, but fundamentally unchanged. Ward K was not unique, it was early. A prototype for a system that would repeat, in various forms, throughout the 20th century. The difference is that Ward K left evidence: the brass tags, the hidden notes, the unsealed letters, the groundskeeper's journal. Most cases left nothing, only the deaths, the silence, and the official records that omitted everything that mattered. History remembers what it records, and institutions control what gets recorded. Ward K's patients were not victims of an isolated medical experiment. They were casualties of a structural relationship between industry, government, and medical authority. A relationship that prioritized economic interests over human life and scientific objectivity over ethical accountability. The textile industry continued operating. The Commonwealth avoided scandal. Dr. Morehouse's career advanced. He became a hospital administrator in 1908, a position he held until retirement. The nurses who cycled through Ward K moved on, their silence maintained by severance payments and the quiet knowledge that speaking out would achieve nothing. And the 43 patients, 18 documented, 25 erased, became archival footnotes, their suffering converted into data points in an unpublished study, their deaths reclassified as natural outcomes of infectious disease. The system worked exactly as designed, which is why it continued working in different forms for decades afterward. Ward K's closure was not a correction, it was a completion. Anna Kozlowski was buried in Rutland State Sanitarium's Pauper Cemetery on January 19, 1908. She was the last documented patient from Ward K to die. Her burial plot, Section C, Row 7, Grave 14, is marked only by a number in the sanitarium's log. No headstone, no name, no acknowledgement of who she was or how she died. Rutland's pauper cemetery contains over 800 graves from the sanitarium's operational years. Most are unmarked. Patients who died without family, without funds, without social standing were buried in numbered plots, their identities preserved only in administrative records. The cemetery is still there, overgrown and largely forgotten, at the edge of what is now Rutland State Park. A historical marker, installed in 1995, acknowledges the site's existence. Rutland State Sanitarium Cemetery, final resting place of tuberculosis patients, 1898 to 1965. No mention of Ward K. No mention of the 18 patients transferred from Shattuck Hospital. No mention of industrial poisoning, falsified diagnoses, or state-sanctioned concealment. In 2003, a memorial committee attempted to install individual markers for identified graves in the cemetery. The project stalled due to funding limitations. Only 40 markers were placed. Anna Kozlowski's grave was not among them. Her name exists in archival records, Rutland admission files, death certificates, burial logs. But at the site of her grave, there is nothing. Just grass, soil, and the accumulated silence of a century. She is not alone in this erasure. The 25 patients who were never documented, never admitted, never recorded, never named, left even less. No admission forms means no transfers. No transfers means no death certificates. No death certificates means no burial records. They likely died in Ward K or shortly after transfer. They were likely buried in unmarked graves at Shattuck Hospital's own cemetery, or in Boston's public burial grounds, or in graves recorded under false names to maintain the fiction that they had never been patients at all. Their bodies returned to the earth without acknowledgement. Their names, if they were ever written anywhere, were written in documents that were burned, discarded, or locked away so completely that no researcher in 120 years has found them. They are history's disappeared. People whose existence can be inferred from gaps, contradictions, and physical evidence, but who left no direct trace in the written record. 43 brass tags, 18 names, 25 absences. And somewhere in Massachusetts, in unmarked earth, lie the remains of people whose suffering was deemed too inconvenient to document, whose deaths were too economically threatening to acknowledge, whose humanity was erased so thoroughly that even their burial locations are unknown. The cemetery at Rutland preserves the documented, but the undocumented rest in places that have no memorials, no markers, no historical acknowledgement. Their graves are as silent as the records that refuse to name them. Every record has a border, a line separating what is preserved from what is lost. Archives contain what institutions chose to keep. Everything else vanishes. Ward K's archive is fragmentary by design. The official hospital records present a coherent, unremarkable narrative. 18 patients admitted, treated, transferred, and discharged according to standard protocols. Nothing unusual, nothing requiring further examination. But the archive's gaps tell a different story. The missing personal effects inventories, the destroyed intake photographs, the burned documents, Isaiah Fletcher incinerated on Dr. Morehouse's orders, the sealed letters that were never mailed, the observation notebooks that were ordered but never appeared in documented inventory. These absences are not accidental, they are structural, created through deliberate acts of destruction and omission designed to ensure that certain truths would remain unrecoverable. The brass tags survived because they were discarded as waste, not recognized as evidence. Dr. Morehouse's private notes survived because they were forgotten in a personal library, not destroyed with official files. Ruth Garrison's 1949 letter survived because it arrived after everyone responsible was dead, rendering it historically interesting but legally irrelevant. What survives is what escaped institutional control. And what escaped was not enough to reconstruct the full truth, only enough to prove that truth was deliberately concealed. The 25 undocumented patients remain the archive's central void. No names, no faces, no biographical details. They exist only as absences, the gap between 43 tags and 18 records, the extra meals ordered, the additional linens laundered, the bodies buried in unmarked locations. Historians work with fragments, but some fragments are so thoroughly destroyed that reconstruction becomes speculation. And speculation, however well informed, cannot restore what was erased. Ward K's archive will never be complete. The Commonwealth did not preserve what it needed to hide. Dr. Morehouse did not document what he could not publish. The nurses did not testify to what their severance payments required them to forget. And the patients, both documented and undocumented, could not speak for themselves once they were isolated, studied, transferred, and buried. The archive's limits are the limits of institutional power. What institutions cannot control, they destroy. What they cannot destroy, they bury. What they cannot bury, they classify as irrelevant, clerical error, routine procedure. Ward K exists now as a case study in archival erasure, a demonstration of how thoroughly institutions can eliminate evidence when their interests require silence. The brass tags are displayed at the Massachusetts State Archives labeled Patient Identification Tags, Shattuck Hospital, 1903. Visitors can see them, count them, note the discrepancy between 43 tags and documented records. But they cannot see the faces of the 25 patients whose tags remain. They cannot hear their names. They cannot know how they died, where they are buried, or who mourned them. The archive preserves the fact of their existence, but it cannot restore their humanity. Shattuck Hospital continued operating until 1991, when it was absorbed into a larger medical system and eventually demolished. During its 89 years of operation, the hospital served thousands of patients, advanced public health initiatives, and contributed to medical education. Ward K is not mentioned in the hospital's official histories. The institution's 75th anniversary publication, released in 1978, includes detailed accounts of major medical achievements, notable physicians, and facility expansions. Ward K does not appear. The isolation ward's existence is omitted entirely, as though the building, the patients, and the 4-month operation never occurred. This omission is not oversight. It is institutional memory functioning as designed, preserving achievements, erasing failures, curating a legacy that serves the institution's ongoing reputation. Institutions do not remember trauma, they remember triumph. They do not memorialize their complicity, they memorialize their progress. Shattuck Hospital's demolition in the 1990s erased Ward K's physical location. No plaques mark where the building stood. No memorials acknowledge the patients who were confined there. The land was redeveloped, paved over, converted into a commercial district that serves no function beyond profit. The hospital's medical records were transferred to the Massachusetts State Archives, where they remain accessible to researchers. But accessing them requires knowing what to look for. Ward K does not appear in subject indexes or finding aids. It exists in the archive as miscellaneous documents, scattered across multiple collections, discoverable only through deliberate cross-referencing and sustained investigation. Eleanor Voss's 1985 dissertation and the 1991 journal article by Voss and Chen remain the only published scholarship focused specifically on Ward K. The articles are cited occasionally in studies of medical ethics, industrial medicine, and archival methodology. But they have not entered mainstream historical consciousness. Ward K is known among specialists. It is unknown to the public. This is how institutional memory functions. Not through active suppression in the present, but through passive omission, allowing uncomfortable truths to fade simply by not repeating them, not memorializing them, not integrating them into the narratives institutions tell about themselves. Shattuck Hospital's legacy is defined by the patients it healed, not the patients it studied. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts remembers its public health achievements, not its complicity in industrial cover-ups. The medical profession celebrates its advances, not the experiments conducted without consent or accountability. Ward K is not taught in medical schools. It does not appear in textbooks on hospital history. It is not included in discussions of research ethics or informed consent. It exists as a footnote, a case study, an archival peculiarity, known to those who seek it out, invisible to everyone else. And in that invisibility lies the final erasure. Not the destruction of records, but the cultural decision that some histories are not worth remembering, not worth teaching, not worth integrating into our collective understanding of how institutions function. Ward K's patients were erased twice. First, when they were isolated and studied. Second, when the institutions that confined them chose to forget. 121 years after Ward K closed, 43 brass tags remain in the Massachusetts State Archives. They are stored in a climate-controlled vault, catalogued as Artifact Collection 1947 to HC 0143. Researchers can request to view them by appointment. The tags are small, 2 inches long, 1 inch wide, stamped with bed numbers and dates. They weigh almost nothing, but they carry the only physical evidence that 43 patients existed in Ward K, even as the official records admit only 18. 25 people were erased so completely that their names are unknown, their faces unseen, their voices unheard. But their tags remain, brass refusing to corrode, metal outlasting paper, physical reality contradicting institutional narrative. The tags cannot speak, but they prove that silence is not the same as absence. History is a negotiation between what institutions preserve and what survives despite them. Ward K was meant to be forgotten, its records destroyed, its patients erased, its operation buried beneath decades of institutional amnesia. But fragments persisted. A groundskeeper stored tags in a shed. A doctor kept private notes in a textbook. A nurse wrote a letter decades too late. A graduate student noticed a discrepancy. A librarian found hidden papers. Researchers connected fragments across archives. The story reconstructed itself from the debris of its own erasure. What remains of Ward K is incomplete, fragmentary, and insufficient. We will never know the names of the 25 undocumented patients. We will never read their words, see their photographs, trace their lives before and after Ward K. We will never fully understand the scope of Dr. Morehouse's study, the Commonwealth's involvement, or the extent of institutional complicity. But we know they existed. We know they suffered. We know they were used. And we know that institutions, hospitals, governments, industries, chose profit and reputation over accountability and truth. Ward K is not a relic, it is a warning. The mechanisms that created Ward K, industrial negligence, state complicity, medical exploitation, archival erasure, did not end in 1904. They adapted, they evolved. They continue operating in forms we have not yet recognized, documenting harms we have not yet named, producing archives that will be incomplete by design. History does not repeat, but structures persist. And the question Ward K forces us to confront is not how could this happen, but how often does this happen in ways we have not yet uncovered. The brass tags sit in their vault, waiting. Not for justice. Justice is impossible for the dead. Not for closure. Closure is a fiction we tell ourselves to escape discomfort, but for recognition. 43 patients, 18 documented, 25 erased. Their suffering was real. Their erasure was intentional. Their memory, such as it is, exists only because fragments survived what institutions tried to destroy. And in those fragments lies a truth institutions cannot archive away. That every record has a gap. Every gap has a reason, and every reason serves someone's interest. The ward that no nurse would enter is gone. But what it contained, the logic of disposability, the machinery of erasure, the willingness to sacrifice human life for institutional convenience, remains. Waiting, in archives, in policies, in the quiet gaps between what is documented and what is true. The brass tags remember, even when the records do not.